Welcome back, everybody. It's the Advanced Photo Manipulation Movie Poster Effects course. My name is Kirk Nelson, and we find ourselves now on lesson number 10. This is the glow effects. Okay, so here's where we last left our giant fighting robot. We added some grunge and some scratch and some rust effects to him. Now we need to add in some glow effects because we want it to look a little more high-techy and more advanced tech than it currently does. Right now it looks very iron-ish and almost steampunk in nature, and we want it to have at least a high-tech digital flavor to it. So we're going to use the same green glows that were started up here with the eyes. Well, that's the windows to the pilots anyway. Those have a really nice green hue to them. We're going to carry on with that same idea on the rest of the glowing areas. Now, of course, you have to have a sword that glows because that's just cool. And the best way to do this is to add layer styles to the group. Remember, we have the sword layers here are all grouped into a single folder. And so we can add layer styles to that. And of course, part of the challenge is getting this dialog box out of the way so you can actually see what you're doing on the artwork. But let's begin with an outer glow. Have it at screen, put it to a nice bright green, and increase the size significantly. And then it's really, really apparent there. So let's bring that opacity down. So it's a very subtle glow there. Okay, next I'm going to add the satin style and change that to color dodge. And again with the green color. And one of the great things about using the satin style is it's one of those layer styles you can grab on the canvas and move it around. And you can soften it some by using the size slider. Okay, the next effect that I want to add involves these center fans. I want to make it look like there's a bright green light behind the fans, and that light is just spewing forth from between the fan blades. So I did have to go and retrieve the source fan layer from the original construction elements, because remember in the last lesson, I did flatten my layers, and I suggested that you actually use a merged copy of yours. So you may still have this layer. Otherwise, you're going to need to go back and dig for it in your previous files. So now to work with it, I'm going to just move it up over here into this open sky area so I can see it more clearly. And I'll start with using a levels command to increase the contrast significantly. Okay, and then I'm also going to desaturate that layer too. Image adjustments, desaturate. So I've got just a black and white high contrast copy of those fans. Then I'm going to create a selection the exact shape as that by control clicking or command clicking on that layer in the layers panel and copying those pixels with edit copy or control or command C. Then I will add a new layer. Notice the selection is still there. It's still an active selection. I'm going to select the green from his eyes and fill that selection with the green. Keep the selection active because we're going to add a mask. It automatically uses the selection to create the mask, and that's fine for right now, but we actually need to get that selection back. So we're going to control or command click on that mask again. Now, this is an important step in this technique, and it's really a neat one that I think you're going to like. If you Alt or Option click on the mask thumbnail, you can view the mask that's being used. You view the grayscale file that Photoshop is using to interpret the visibility of that layer. And because I have that selection already created, I can now paste those copied pixels from those fans into this selection. Remember when we copied that a couple steps back? It's still on the clipboard. So edit, paste, and it pastes it right back in there. Now we can blow away the selection, select, deselect, and then click back on the regular layer so that we're not viewing the mask anymore. And we're actually viewing the actual layers. Okay, now we can apply this mask to this layer by right-clicking, saying apply layer mask. And then we need to touch it up a little bit. So we're going to use the eraser tool with a regular round eraser. Remove those center portions. And then I don't really like the solid rim that we have around that. So I'm going to control click on that original layer again, that original chest fan layer, to create those circular selections. And I'm then going to modify that selection with select, modify, contract. I'm going to go in by 2 pixels. That's good. And then I'm going to inverse the selection. Select inverse. So I'm picking the outside of those circles now and hitting the delete key and cancel that selection. So now I'm left with just these fans, which is exactly what I wanted, because now I'm going to create a rectangular selection, a perfectly square one, by holding down the shift key, and then change to the move tool and make sure that is centered in that selection using these align widgets up here. Then with the selection still active, and then I'm going to create a copy of that. So copy that layer, hide that first one, and on this copied version, I'm going to run the radial blur filter. So filter, blur, radial blur. I've got it set to zoom best and rated about 60 for the amount, and creates a beautiful motion blur effect on that layer. Then reveal the original one again, and that needs to have a little bit of softening to it. So I'm going to run just a regular Gaussian blur on that one. Radius of about 1.5 pixels. Then set both of these layers to screen and move them into place. On that base one, pull down on the opacity a little bit. And that blur one looks like it could use some enhancing because it's barely even visible. So we could even just go ahead and copy that. And on that other copy, we can expand it up a little bit. And if it looks a little bit too strong, just pull back on that opacity too. Then I'm going to group these together, and these are fan glows. Okay, so the next effect is going to be to add some glowing plasma in the barrel of the gun here. So to do that, first I will start by selecting just that dark part of the gun by using the quick selection tool, set to sample all layers. Now I've got a new layer created, and then I will just fill that selection with the green color. Okay, and then I will blur that with a Gaussian blur, crank that up a little bit, set it to screen, and probably even make it a little bit larger. And then, using my brush tool, set to a very small brush with, this time I'm going to use a white paint, and just add a very light white center to that green glow. All right, and I blur it again, so it has a nice gradient applied to it there. And we can enhance it by creating a second copy and merging that one down. And then I'm going to create yet another copy to use the smudge tool with. Now with the smudge tool, I will increase the size of the brush, set the strength to around 90%, and then click once just to the bottom and left of that glow area. Pull down about where the aim would be, press the shift key, and click again. And the smudge tool pulls out a nice glow aspect from that. Now it's looking a little bit strong, so we'll dial it back a little. All right, next, let's create another new layer. Create a rectangular selection. Change my colors to the default black and white, but then change that white part to that green color that we're using. And now I'm going to fill this selection with the cloud filter. So filter, render, clouds. Deselect, and I'm going to set this layer to color dodge. So when I move this over on top of that plasma looking glow there, you see a really good distortion of that. And then we simply transform this into shape. So it creates almost a sputtering, flickering type of aspect to it. Use the distort transformation to sharpen it down some so that the point is more of a point than the base is, and it needs to be softened. So we'll use an eraser tool to just pull out some of those hard edges. And then decrease, again, the opacity of some of the other layers so that we've got a really nice glowing gun barrel there. Okay, so now for the final glow effect, I'm going to add in some small lights that would serve as like flood or spotlights that the robot would be shining on his opponent. Now, what this will do is not only add some additional visual interest, but it also enhances the scale of the robot. Because a spotlight is something we're very familiar with and we immediately recognize visually as a specific size. And so when we see those added and we mentally attach a size to it, it makes whatever it's on appear to be in relative size to that. So by adding a spotlight here and the spotlight looks small, it means the robot looks big. So let's begin with a simple ellipse up here, a round selection right there. And I've got this new layer that I'm calling Spotlight. And then I'm going to fill that with white and then add a glow effect to that. So use a outer glow, set it to white as well, and increase the size and spread a little bit. Okay, then another new layer, and use the polygonal lasso tool to create the actual spot shape, that narrow triangular shape that we associate with a spotlight, and then use the gradient tool going from foreground to transparent. Make sure the foreground's white. Now you can use either the linear or the radial mode. It doesn't really matter. In this case, they both work pretty well. But the point is just to drag it out to create the spot look there. Now it's a little bit too sharp, so just a simple Gaussian blur will fix that. Okay, now I just repeated that same process to add lights along the top and a middle light right along his belt line. And that adds a lot of really nice and believable glow effects to our robot. And with that, we are now at the end of lesson number 10. Next lesson, number 11, we'll start addressing the surrounding area, the environment. We'll add in some new background clouds and some other things like shadows and reflections of the robot. And that's really going to start bringing this composition home and making it look like one big cohesive scene.